Good afternoon, everyone. Elke Rubach from Rubach Wealth with a very special guest today for our community spotlight, Bruce McDonald from Imagine Canada, an industry organization for charities, social entrepreneurs, and what am I missing, Bruce?
Nonprofits.
Nonprofits. So as you know, part of the conversations we have with our families is around their values and what's important to them. And philanthropy is a big component. It helps families stay together. So we have this huge opportunity to have Bruce here with us today, who's going to talk a little bit about what Imagine Canada does. So Bruce, welcome.
Well, thanks very much. Wonderful to be here.
Well, Bruce, tell me a little bit about yourself. Tell me a little bit about Imagine Canada.
Yeah, Imagine Canada is a national organization, and what we really hope to do is positively influence the operating environment in which social good takes place. And we do that primarily through advocating with the federal government to change the laws or the regulations that govern charities. We do a lot of research work to make sure that the leaders of charities and nonprofits have the right information with which to work. You know, we're big on trust and transparency. So we certify charities, we accredit them for the highest levels of good governance, transparency, and accountability. And our fourth area is that we seek to engage with Canadians to think more broadly and more intentionally about their connection to their communities.
So you're certainly elevating the level and the responsibility on both sides, the giving and the receiving. Very interesting times. COVID certainly shuffled everything. How was Imagine Canada impacted, and more so, how is the work you do impacted by COVID? Because probably charities are the ones that are suffering the most.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would say that really the answer to the question is less about how is Imagine Canada impacted and more how are the nation's 86,000 charities, the almost 90,000 nonprofits, and the 7,000 social entrepreneurs dealing with this. And I would say that, you know, we're actually quite concerned. As we think about the almost structural design flaws in social good, they're really coming under a spotlight. And what I mean by that is that for decades, funders have been reticent to provide support for things like people, digital infrastructure, digital specialists, really those kinds of cost of administration kinds of things. At a time when organizations have needed to move quickly to adapt their programs, their fundraising systems, et cetera, online, that infrastructure, that strong infrastructure hasn't been there. And the second thing that it's really illuminated has been that there's actually been funders who've again, not really been the most interested in supporting the overall financial health and well-being, but really just want to fund programs and projects. So many organizations don't have any cash reserves or very few cash reserves. And what we're witnessing right now, they're working through those. And so the future of the sector, it's in question right now as to how organizations are going to survive and thrive as we coexist with COVID for the next 2 to 3 years.
I find it fascinating because obviously the economic environment shifted, and you know the most vulnerable are feeling it first and harder. And I think it's very optimistic to think that the government will get to all the problems that exist. You know, it's beyond just hospitals and universities. You know, there's literacy, there's so many more causes that you can name, right? And there are so many charities, but from a donor perspective, when there's so much information, how does Imagine Canada help people concentrate in the right reasons and the right causes, or figure out what they believe in and how they contribute?
Well, I mean, probably two ways that we contribute to that conversation. One is that we really encourage donors to do their homework. You know, if they're going to make substantive investments in a cause, make sure you start with one that's truly your passion, because there's lots of organizations that might serve that particular cause, and then spend a little bit of time doing some investigation around, are the outcomes from that organization? Is the transparency there? Are you seeing those kinds of governance practices, so that you as a citizen feel confident that those dollars are being well stewarded, that the impact's being realized, and that the difference that you hope is being made is in fact being made. And one of the ways that you can actually think about that is to look for the accreditation seal of approval that we actually award to charities. I mean, they have to earn it. But we accredit charities, 73 standards in 5 different areas. And what that signals to the public is that they are doing everything that they possibly can to adhere to the highest levels of governance. Because, I mean, trust is at the root of the relationship between donors and organizations. And it's incumbent upon us who work in the sector to publicly demonstrate that we're always seeking to earn that trust.
And how do you envision the charitable giving landscape going forward?
Well, it's a bit of an unknown. I mean, if you look at the trends before COVID, the good news, in raw dollars, they were going up. The bad news, the number of donors over the last about 25 years has been decreasing. So, and part of that is that older, wealthier donors are representing more of the giving. They have the ability later in life, later in their careers, at the peak of their earning, to be more generous. So our question has been, where's the next generations of philanthropists coming from? Right now with COVID, we think a couple of things have happened. One is we live in this wonderfully generous nation. So people stepped up, March, April, and May, people were making contributions to organizations really on the front line. But the questions we're asking is, well, many people make their contributions in the last 8 weeks of the year. That's when about 40% of individual giving is done in this country. Those March, April, May contributions and donations, did they represent additional investments, or were they pulled forward, meaning that they won't be there in the back half of the year? We don't know yet. It's too early to tell. But what we're hoping is that as more people have engaged with organizations during the pandemic, that they've had a good experience, they might consider being ongoing supporters in the future.
And what are the biggest fears you're hearing from charities right now?
I'd say the biggest fears are the combination of dramatic increases in demand for services combined with reductions in supply, meaning resources. It's interesting, the Ontario Nonprofit Network, which is a kind of a companion organization to Imagine Canada, working exclusively in the province of Ontario, just recently put out a poll where they had asked charitable leaders and nonprofit leaders about these types of concerns. One statistic which shows you the level of severity of concern that just blew me away, 10% of respondents were indicating they were using personal wealth, these are staff who work in nonprofits and charities, to keep the organization afloat. So they were maxing out their own credit cards just to keep the organization going. So there is this concern that with still not being able to run big special events, still not being able to do door-to-door canvassing, that maybe they've weathered the initial storm, but if those fundraising streams are reduced or annihilated in the future, how are organizations going to survive? And I think that's the biggest concern.
And on the other hand, your 30 years of giving report says that donors complain about misuse, like 29% is it, of donors complain of misuse of funds. Like how does that connect?
Yeah, it's one of those, I actually did find that a bit of a high statistic, because the real sort of charity scandals or fraudulent stories they're truly few and far between. I think the unfortunate part is they get a lot of attention. So the suggestion is it's maybe more widespread as a bad practice than it actually is in the sector. I mean, it's interesting that the charitable construct is perhaps one of the most transparent constructs around when you think about it, because charities are required by law to report to the federal government every year on all of their business, their spending. They have to, list it all out. Organizations are run by volunteer boards of directors. People in your communities volunteer their time to be the overseers of how the organizations operate. For the most part, organizations publish publicly their audited financial statements, they list their boards, they put their impact statements out. So by and large, this sector operates with a far greater level of transparency than any other sector in the country. And as I've always said, good organizations welcome scrutiny, welcome transparency.
And I guess that's where your seal of approval is so much more valuable, right? And gives you comfort. Because I, as you say, I think Canadians, generally speaking, want to give, but they don't know where. And there's so much noise and so many, requests, so many people come to you. And obviously these organizations are mostly ran by people who were affected by the situation, whatever it was, one way or the other. So the passion is there, but how do you make sure that the impact is there too? In your opinion, how can individuals make charitable giving part of their monthly routine or their ongoing giving?
This may seem like a patently obvious response, but I think they need to be intentional about it. A lot of our research around why people don't give comes back to something as simple as they don't think about it. And so if they're planning monthly or annual budgets, to incorporate philanthropy or charitable giving into those. And one of the things I would offer as a way to do that is to think about the future of philanthropy. One of the things that our research has continued to show us is that one of the reasons why fewer people give is because of the connection to religiosity. As fewer people go to church, it's almost like to use a good sports analogy, our farm system is drying up. Many philanthropists talk about the fact that they learned to give in church, temple, synagogue, mosque, because they actually saw the act of giving. In today's world, many people give online. So you just think about a family, busy parents, kids go to bed, they say, I'm going to make my charitable gift. You've got children who are living in families who don't even know that their family is generous. So maybe one way to get intentional, thoughtful giving going is to talk about it as a family. Sit down every month and say, we've got $100 to give this month. Who are we going to give it to? Invite their kids to be part of the process so that they realize and understand that that's part of being in a community. And it actually seeds the next generation of philanthropists.
When we talk to our families, we always ask, how do you feel about giving and philanthropy and charities? And I can tell you there's the most common situations we bump into is an initial lack of clarity and comfort in terms of how much they can give. And then they're usually very surprised that the affluence is, you don't have to be a billionaire to give, right? The $5, the $10 or whatever people can afford to really go a long way. And it's also very important. The second part is not only the clarity and the comfort, is teaching the next generation the stewardship of their wealth, at whatever level it is, and keeping the family together and making sure that the values can be preserved for the future. And so when we have those conversations, it's really a key pillar of their plans, and people enjoy it. Have your lemonade stand for a certain cause or whatever it is, right? At whatever level, I think teaching people the value of earning a dollar and also responsibility of looking after those who are less fortunate. And I think generally speaking, people get it.
Yes.
It's now just making it happen.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I would even maybe take it a step further, because one of the things that we think has happened during the COVID-19 pandemic is that more Canadians have come into direct contact with charities and nonprofits. Families that had two working parents who both lost their job never thought they would be standing in line at a food bank getting food for their kids. Or a rise in domestic abuse cases, because for weeks, people were told to stay in their house, and some of those weren't very good places to stay for women. Or rises in mental health crisis. One of the hopeful outcomes that I have from the pandemic is that those experiences now as beneficiaries of service translate into acts of generosity, where not everybody can give $1 million, but maybe they can give $5, $25, $50, $100 a month and make a contribution to ensuring that should they need those services, or friends or family members or work colleagues need those services, that they will be there when they need them. Because it really does take our society to pull together to ensure that system is in place.
So due to technical difficulties, we had to stop the video. But Bruce, That brings me to the next point. Generally speaking, corporations have interest in social involvement. How do you see it going forward? A few weeks ago, we had the intervention of Michael Albert-Severig from Germany, who came up with a new book. And how do you see corporations in Canada getting involved, and how can they interact with Imagine Canada to get the best out of it?
Sure. I think that we're going to continue to see, and the pandemic may in fact propel it forward, more companies getting engaged with their communities. I think there was a long-standing trend prior to COVID around companies needing to demonstrate that they do more than earn profit. And I think as they're looking at tighter labor markets, being environmentally responsible, also looking at their supply chains and whether those are ethical supply chains, I think there's more pressure from society for companies to demonstrate that they are responsible owner-operators. Part of that is their connection to community. And so we see going forward a continuation of that trend where they will engage their employees, make financial contributions, look at all aspects of their business because it's good for them as companies. More and more citizens are looking at them. They're discerning consumers now and saying, I want to support those firms that are aligned with my values. So those that adapt to this, it's good for business. There's nothing wrong with that. And wouldn't it be great for society to be better off because our collective practices are better?
Do you interact with those corporations at all in terms of seal of approval as well?
Yeah, so we have a companion program to our accreditation program for charities. Is something we call Caring Company Certification. So since 1988, Imagine Canada has provided certification to corporations who spend 1% of pre-tax profits on community investment. And that can be straight cash contributions, in-kind contributions. We count time and connection to their employees and the costs that are associated with it. And if those are 1% or higher, they're eligible to be an Imagine Canada Caring Company. And it's a proud seal of approval that many corporations in this country carry.
I think it's all fascinating, and particularly given the times we're living, I think Imagine Canada has such a huge role to play. So, Bruce, I don't want to abuse your time. Thank you so much for your contribution. Please let us know how we can help, and let's carry on. Everybody should stay happy and healthy.
Yes, you too. Thanks very much for the time today.